This is 93.7 3D Radio. I was talking before about a new book by Lynn McLean called Wireless Wise Families and the dangers that are posed by all our Wi-Fi devices. And I've just read it. It's a new book come out, published in Australia by Scribe. And very fortunate to have Lynn prepared to come on the show and tell us a bit more about this. Good morning, Lynn. How are you going?
Good morning, Andrew. I'm fine, and thanks for the invitation to talk with you today.
Absolute pleasure. I suppose you're described as someone who's a consumer advocate, and well, how would you describe yourself? You're particularly interested in electromagnetic radiation.
Yeah, I think I'd describe myself as an educator. I really want people to understand this technology that they're using, and what I've observed over 20 years of doing this work is that a lot of people don't. So they're quite surprised to find out what their wireless devices are actually giving out and what the wireless devices that their children are using are giving out. So we're just trying to raise awareness, then they can make better choices about how to use them. So we're not saying don't use this technology, we're saying if you do it this way, you're going to be safer, you're exposing yourself to less radiation, potentially improving the health and well-being of your family.
Well, one of the main things about it is it's pretty new technology, so we don't really know what effects it can have on us physically, I suppose, physiologically, although pretty clearly it's had fairly dramatic effects socially and psychologically already. And I suppose we're talking about not all forms of Wi-Fi, but our tablets and our mobile phones have changed the way that we live and communicate with each other.
Yeah, that's quite right, and I think that this is a dramatic change in our patterns of behaviour and patterns of communication over just a very short period of time. And what we're seeing, and I think everybody who's listening will appreciate this, is that there's a lot of addictions. So a lot of people are addicted to their mobile phones, their devices, and so that means they're spending longer time on these devices, and there are all sorts of consequences of that. And this is not simply my research, but I think you'll find there's a lot of information out there in the media about the effects of addiction, the fact that people are becoming more anxious, they're more highly stressed, they're on call, on demand most of the time now. So that's actually changing their brainwave patterns. And it's contributing to things like anxiety and depression. And believe it or not, even when people are connected on social media and they're spending lots of time on social media and having lots of, in inverted commas, friends on social media, the finding is that they're actually less happy. So I think the overuse of this technology has got really large implications for people and families and family relationships as well.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt, but and I'm really interested in that, and I'm sure we are seeing that, and it's actually quite tragic, and it just reminds me of a bit in your book where you talk about what's happening in schools, because that is coming through with kids, lots of kids having headaches and having trouble socialising at school, so all sorts of problems. But your main focus is on the idea that if you're sitting in a classroom, you're getting bombarded with radiation, electromagnetic radiation, because the school's wired for Wi-Fi, which puts out a whole lot of energy, and also every device that's sitting in that classroom, if it's not plugged in but running Wi-Fi, is also emitting radiation. Is that how it works?
Yeah, pretty much. So if you can imagine a child in a classroom is being exposed to the radiation from the router, plus his, let's say, laptop, plus the laptop of everybody else in the classroom. So this is not something that's ever happened in the history of education before. So we don't know the long-term impacts of that sort of exposure, because we're talking long-term. We're talking lots of hours a day for kids. And certainly there are lots of kids now who are developing all sorts of problems at school, like headaches you mentioned before, but also things like rash and fatigue. And some kids are now so badly affected by being in the classroom that they are not really able to be comfortably in the classroom anymore, and their parents are withdrawing them from school and homeschooling them. And we know quite a few kids where this has happened, they've not been able to attend school. So it's, I think these are new changes that we're seeing in society. And I guess we can also ask the question, well, is this technology benefiting our kids in terms of education? Well, I think the jury's still out on that, because there's some evidence that that is more entertaining to kids, but it's also changing their learning patterns, and we have to ask whether that's necessarily a good thing. And there's some evidence that actually taking mobile phones away from kids makes them learn better in the classroom.
Yeah, I was reading that some of the people in Silicon Valley send their kids to completely natural schools where there are no computers, because they think it would be better for them. But just looking at the radiation, how is that different, say, from the router to your computer, laptop, tablet, compared to, say, a phone tower to a mobile phone? Is it similar radiation?
Yeah, well, all of these sources are sending out what's called radio frequency electromagnetic fields, or radio frequency radiation. I guess we call it wireless radiation because it's a bit more convenient. So they're different frequencies that some of these technologies are emitting, but basically they're all in the bag of wireless radiation. Now, this radiation has been classified as a Class 2B, which means possible carcinogen, by the International Agency for Research on Cancer. And that's based mainly on studies on mobile phones, because clearly the research on Wi-Fi, for example, is much newer. There's not so much of that research around. But if we're certainly seeing thousands of studies that are showing harmful effects on the body. So that doesn't necessarily mean cancers and brain tumours, but it certainly means that there is evidence of harm to the body. So given that, I guess we've got to ask, well, what's the long-term effect of this radiation? And when we think that kids are now being exposed from before birth, and they're being exposed soon after birth, maybe the baby monitor sitting next to the cot, maybe they're playing with their mum's mobile phone, maybe they've got their own iPad when they're really little, and we don't know what the effects of that are going to be 20, 30, 40 years down the track. So this younger generation now is an experimental generation, and we're going to have a really good idea about how they're affected 20, 30, 40 years' time. But the problem is that for those kids, it will be too late if there are problems emerging. But some of the interesting things are that even kids who've only been exposed for a short period of time, already we're seeing changes in their behaviour, and not necessarily good ones. So, for example, one group of scientists did a study on mums who used mobile phones quite a lot while they were pregnant, and they found that the kids who were exposed while they were in utero and when they were quite young had more behaviour problems than by the time they turned 7 than kids who weren't exposed. So what we're seeing is changes in behaviour that are a bit ADHD-like. So attention deficit sort of behaviour.
Yeah, and I'm not surprised, because I live in quite a busy street, and parents walk their kids up in prams, and always have, from the shops to their homes, and they used to talk to them and sing to them and stuff, and now they're shouting at their friends, parents, whatever. They're having this half a conversation at some volume, which is what a baby is hearing now, instead of the contact that it used to have with its mother. That concerns me. But then that's again going back to the psychological, sociological effects of the technology rather than the actual radiation.
Yeah, well, I think we've got two things here, because I think very often mums are spending time with their kids while they're on their mobile phones. So, for example, there's something called brexting, which is when mums are on their phone while they're breastfeeding their child. So their child is being held really close to the mobile phone. So clearly the child is in that field. So the child's being exposed and the mum's attention is somewhere else. And I think we all know that in relationships, when you're relating to the other person, that's different to actually being physically in the same room as them. It's more about that interpersonal connection that you have. So if people are connecting with their mobile phone more than the other person who's in the room with them, what's that doing to relationships? And
no doubt.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, I'm talking to Lynn McLean about her new book. It's called Wireless Wise Families. It's from an Australian publisher, a great little publisher, Scribe. It's only 100 pages long, and it's just jam-packed full of the information that you might want as a parent, and just being cautious about the new technology and what it might do to you. Lynn, we were talking about the social implications of the Wi-Fi technology, but what you're really focusing on here is the electromagnetic radiation, or the EMR, that comes from all these devices that we surround ourselves with. And of course, we're a radio station. We're putting out electromagnetic radiation, aren't we?
Yes, you are. But I did actually mention that I measured in a radio station once, and I measured at the workstation where somebody was actually doing what you were doing as a presenter, and we found that there was hardly anything there, so that might make you feel a bit better.
Right. Yeah, well, that's good. Very good. But we must put it out. We've got a mountain here over Adelaide where we send out digital signal as well as a frequency modulation signal, an FM one. And they go a long way. They don't go around corners very well. They do go through walls and things, though, it seems, so that people can listen to us. Look, I don't actually have devices myself much at all because I don't like them for the reasons we've already been discussing. Not to mention, I'm a bit cautious about the fact that they do give off this radiation. But on the other hand, you could be living next to a mobile phone tower whether you've got a telephone or not. And I do have a cordless phone at home, and I was interested to read your book. Do you say that it being cordless means that there's radiation present from that?
Yeah, actually, they're one of the highest sources in a home, and that's because they're usually giving out that radiation 24/7 from both the base and the handset, and they're doing that irrespective of whether you're making a call or not. So whereas a mobile phone has adaptive power control, the cordless phones generally don't. So it means that you're getting quite high power when you're talking on the phone. So we tend to suggest to people not to use cordless if you can possibly avoid it. But Andrew, you make the point that people are exposed to radiation from external sources like radio towers and mobile phone towers and so forth. Yes, that's true, but what most people don't realise is that the highest exposure that they're getting, generally speaking, comes from their own technology. And that's something that you do have control over. So if you've got a baby monitor next to a baby, or you've got a router on a desk, or you've got a cordless phone next to your bed, for example, you could be spending quite a lot of time in quite a high field. So those are things that you can easily manage, and where you place the technology makes a big difference to your exposure, and how much time you spend on it makes a big difference to your exposure. So in other words, there are things that people can do within their homes to improve things for themselves and for their kids. So one of the things that I'm trying to do in this book is to let people know this information so that they can make informed choices about just what they're exposed to.
One point that you make is on the actual, if you get your phone and read the instructions, which no one ever does, of course, it says don't touch it against your head and don't keep it near your genitals and things like that, because it might be harmful to you. And there's no doubt that my friends report that when they hold their phone near to their head, it gets hot, and their ears get hot and their head gets hot. But it is low-frequency, non-ionising radiation, which is what the scientists would say. Therefore, it's not really a problem.
Yeah, well, that's an assumption. It's an assumption it's not a problem. And there was an assumption once that asbestos wasn't a problem. There was also an assumption that tobacco wasn't a problem. And those assumptions changed over time as the scientific evidence became more available. And I guess we're at that interesting phase now where there is a lot of scientific evidence that's starting to be out there in the journals, and it is showing harmful effects. And I guess the problem is, how much harmful effect do you need to actually see in the science before you start taking notice? And I guess that's where the debate is. So some people will say, oh, well, it's only a little bit of a harmful effect. It's the same here. And that the line is going to be different for every single family, but at least you can make an informed choice if you've got the information.
Absolutely. Informed choice with information. It's all in Lynn McLean's book. I found it really interesting, provocative, and I've been having many discussions with people about it and sort of doing more research outside myself. So thank you very much, Lynn. I think the main thing that I took from your book is that you're better safe than sorry. And as you say, it's fairly new and we really don't know. And I certainly thought of asbestos and tobacco when you hear the glib sort of fobbing off that you get from the industry, because our world is so dependent on this technology now. I mean, what if it turns out that it is dangerous, very dangerous, then the whole world's going to have to change the way we communicate, isn't it?
Well, it's interesting because, I work in an office, I'm on the phone and the computer all day, but I have nothing wireless. I have nothing wireless in my home. I have nothing wireless in my office. I don't own a mobile phone. So you can see how I feel about this. But it doesn't mean that I'm not accessible, and it doesn't mean that I can't do my work. I can. I'm just doing it using cords rather than using a wireless router. And many people who are listening will remember the days when we used to be able to use the internet without a Wi-Fi router. That can still be done.
Yeah, I could still do it if I got a long enough cord. I've got a short yellow one, but it's not plugged in because the router's in the next room, and so we can. Anyway, as you say, people can make their own decisions if they want to be rather be safe than sorry, or if they want to just go with the sheep and take their chances. And take chances with their kids is really what you're saying, because it's a book for families, isn't it?
Yeah, I think this is right, because kids now are growing up, they're called the I generation. They're growing up never having known anything but the use of wireless technologies in their home. So they're not making choices. They don't know how to operate without this. And I think that's quite alarming. So we as parents need to make sure that our kids have got information to use these wireless technologies more safely, but also to know that there are other technologies that aren't going to perhaps be irradiating them, and perhaps prefer those.
Perhaps. Thank you very much, Lynn McLean, the author of Wireless Wise Families. She's an educator and an advocate for the community, focusing on some of our new technologies. Her book is out through Scribe. Thanks so much for talking to us this morning, Lynn.
My pleasure, Andrew.
You must be listening to 93.7 Community Radio, Freewheeling with Andrew. I've got a lot of feedback from listeners. Thank you very much. It's always great to hear from you. And it was great to hear from George, who hadn't called in before, but he always listens to the show and enjoyed that segment. And so did Tom, who called up. He has a good solution to that for his house, because he's got kids. He uses Ethernet over power. Now, I don't quite understand that. I know I can take an Ethernet cable out of my modem, which is in the next room, so I need a fairly long cord to where I use my computer. But he says you can put this plug straight into your power socket, and then you plug your computer into that, and you get your Ethernet going all the way through your house. So as long as your modem's plugged into the same power system as where you want to plug in your devices, then you plug them in, and there it is. You're using, he calls it Ethernet over power, and he found that when Foxtel came to install stuff in his house, that's what they use. Don't worry about the Wi-Fi, don't worry about the long cords. Use the power cords that are already there. Maybe you want to do your own research. This is way out of my league, but I do thank Tom for contributing that as well.